I was shelving the last batch of new picture books when I saw them through the tall library windows. My entire family standing on the sidewalk outside the Eugene Public Library like they had nowhere else to go. My dad's expensive coat was wrinkled. My mom was clutching her designer purse with both hands. My older brother and sister looked like they hadn't slept in days. All four of them were staring straight at me through the glass, eyes wide, mouths moving, but no sound reaching inside. 4 years ago, they had disowned me for taking this lowly teaching job. Now, they were begging outside my library. If you have ever been thrown away by your own family for choosing the life you actually wanted, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. My name is Avery Langford, and this is the story of how my family cut me off for becoming a children's librarian, and how, 4 years later, they stood outside my library door with tears in their eyes, asking for the one thing I had built without them. I grew up in a big, modern house on the hill overlooking Eugene, Oregon. My parents owned a successful commercial real estate company. My brother Connor was already being groomed to take over the family business. My sister Paige was in law school and dating a junior partner at the biggest firm in town. The plan for me had always been simple: get a business degree, join the company, marry well, and keep the Langford name at the top of the social ladder. I ruined that plan the day I told them I wanted to be a librarian. It happened at Sunday dinner 4 years ago. The table was set with the good china. My dad was carving a roast when I finally said the words out loud. I got accepted into the library science program at the University of Oregon. I'm not taking the business internship. I'm going to be a children's librarian. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. My mother set her wine glass down slowly. "Avery, honey, that's a joke, right?" My father didn't even look at me. He just kept carving the roast like I hadn't spoken. Connor laughed once, short and sharp. "You're throwing away everything we built for a job where you read stories to kids and make $9 an hour?" Paige stared at me like I had grown a second head. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is going to be? People are going to ask what our sister does, and we're going to have to say she's a librarian?" I tried to explain. I told them how much I loved working with kids at the summer reading program, how the moment a little girl finally sounded out her first sentence because of a book I gave her was worth more than any corner office, how I had never felt happier than when I was surrounded by stories. They didn't hear a word of it. My father spoke last, his voice cold and final. "If you walk out that door and take this ridiculous job, you are no longer a Langford. You will not get a dime from us. You will not come home for holidays. You will not use our name. As far as we are concerned, you are dead to this family." I sat there for 10 full seconds, waiting for someone to laugh or say it was a cruel joke. No one did. So I stood up, folded my napkin, and walked out of the house with nothing but the clothes on my back and the acceptance letter in my pocket. The first year was brutal. I lived in a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat. I ate a lot of ramen and worked 2 part-time jobs while finishing my degree. I cried in the shower more times than I can count. But every single day, I walked into the children's section of the public library and remembered why I had chosen this life. By the end of year 2, I was a full-time children's librarian at the main branch in downtown Eugene. I started a storytime program that grew so popular, we had to add extra sessions. Parents began requesting me by name. Kids drew me pictures that I taped all over my desk. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. My family never reached out, not once, not when I graduated, not when I got my first full-time position, not even when Grandma passed away and I found out through a cousin's Instagram post. I told myself I was fine. I built a life that was small, but mine. I had friends who loved books as much as I did. I had a cozy apartment filled with plants and secondhand books. I had purpose. Then, 4 years after that Sunday dinner, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, my family showed up outside my library. I was in the middle of putting away the picture books when I saw them. They didn't come inside, they just stood there on the wet sidewalk, looking lost. My dad spotted me first. He raised his hand like he was going to wave, then let it drop. My mom's eyes were red. Paige was biting her lip the way she did when she was trying not to cry. Connor looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. I stood there holding a stack of books, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Everything I had built without them was right here. The colorful rugs, the tiny chairs, the walls covered in children's drawings, and the people who had thrown me away were standing outside begging to be let in. I had no idea what they wanted, but I had a feeling that whatever it was going to change everything all over again. I stood frozen between the picture book shelves, heart pounding so hard it felt like the whole library could hear it. They were still out there. My dad shifted from one foot to the other, rain dripping from his coat. My mom kept wiping her eyes even though the rain was already on her face. Paige had her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold, and Connor just stared at the ground, jaw tight the way it got when he knew he had messed up bad. 4 years. 4 years of radio silence. 4 years of watching my graduation photos get 0 likes from any of them. 4 years of hearing through distant cousins that they told people I had gone off the rails and disappointed the family. And now they were standing outside my library like lost puppies. I could have turned around and walked into the back office. I could have told my coworker Leah to say I wasn't there. Instead, I set the stack of books down on the nearest cart and walked toward the front doors. The automatic door slid open with a soft whoosh. Cold, wet Oregon air rushed in. For a second, nobody moved. Then my mom took one shaky step forward. "Avery." Her voice cracked on my name. I didn't say anything. I just stood there in my comfortable cardigan and librarian name tag, waiting. My dad cleared his throat. "Can we come inside?" "Just for a minute?" I looked at all 4 of them. Really looked. Dad's expensive watch was still on his wrist, but his eyes looked older. Mom's perfect makeup was smudged. Paige's designer bag hung limply from her shoulder. Connor's usual cocky posture was gone. I stepped aside. They filed in quietly, dripping rainwater onto the welcome mat. A few regular patrons glanced over curiously but went back to their books. I led them past the circulation desk and into the small meeting room we used for storytime planning. I closed the door behind us. No one sat down. My mom spoke first, her voice trembling. "We saw the article in the paper last week about the new children's reading program you started, how it's the most popular one in the county, how kids line up to see you every Saturday." I crossed my arms. "You read the paper now?" Connor let out a short, nervous laugh. "We've been keeping tabs. Quietly." Paige stepped closer. "Avery, we were wrong. So wrong. We thought you were throwing your life away. We thought being a librarian meant you'd end up broke and miserable. We had no idea you would actually build something like this." I felt something sharp twist in my chest. "You disowned me," I said, keeping my voice low so it wouldn't carry into the library. "You told me I was dead to the family. You changed the locks on the house the same week I moved out. You didn't come to my graduation. You didn't even send a text when Grandma died." My dad winced like I had slapped him. "We know," he said quietly. "And we're here because we need your help." There it was. I almost laughed, but it came out bitter. "Of course you do." My mom reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out a thick envelope. She held it out to me. "The company is in trouble. Really bad trouble. Your father made some investments that went south. We're on the verge of losing everything. The house, the business, the cars. The bank is foreclosing in 30 days. I didn't take the envelope. Connor rubbed the back of his neck. We tried everything. Banks, investors, even selling some property. Nothing is working. Then we saw that article about you, about how you turned the library's children's program into something the whole city is talking about, how you got grants and sponsorships and made it successful when no one else could. Paige jumped in, her voice desperate. You're good at this, Avery. You're really good. We were hoping maybe you could talk to some of the people you know, the grant writers, the donors, the city council people who love your programs. Maybe you could help us get some kind of emergency funding or partnership or something. They all looked at me like I was their last lifeline. I stared at the 4 people who had thrown me away like yesterday's trash. 4 years ago, they had told me my dream was worthless. Now they wanted me to use that same dream to save them. I felt the old hurt rise up, hot and sharp. But underneath it was something else. Something calmer, stronger. I took the envelope from my mom's hand and didn't open it. I'll look at it, but I'm not making any promises. And I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I actually care about what happens to people, even when they don't deserve it. My dad's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you, Avery. Thank you. I held up one hand. Don't thank me yet. And don't think this means everything is forgiven. You don't get to erase 4 years of silence with one rainy afternoon at my library. They all nodded quickly, like they were afraid I would change my mind. I opened the meeting room door and gestured for them to follow me back through the library. As we walked past the colorful children's section, a little boy recognized me and waved excitedly. Miss Avery, story time tomorrow? I smiled at him, the real kind of smile I hadn't been able to give my family. Wouldn't miss it, buddy.
My family watched the exchange in silence. I could see the confusion on their faces, like they were seeing me for the first time. When we reached the front doors, I stopped. I'll read through everything tonight, I said. I'll call you tomorrow with whatever I can do, but right now, I have work to finish. They stepped back out into the rain without arguing. As the doors slid shut behind them, I leaned against the circulation desk and let out a long breath. Leah, my coworker, raised an eyebrow from behind the counter. Everything okay? I looked out at my family walking away down the wet sidewalk. I don't know yet, I said. But deep down, I knew one thing for sure. They had come here thinking I was still the same girl they could control and discard. They had no idea how much I had changed. And whatever happened next, whether I helped them or not, was going to be on my terms this time. The library lights were already dimmed for closing when I finally locked the front doors behind me that evening. The rain had turned into a steady drizzle. I pulled my hood up and walked the 6 blocks to my apartment above the old bookstore, the envelope from my parents tucked under my arm like it weighed 100 pounds. Every step felt heavier than the last. I kept replaying the way they had looked standing outside the glass, desperate, small. Nothing like the powerful Langford family I had grown up fearing and trying to please. My little apartment smelled like cinnamon tea and old books when I stepped inside. I kicked off my wet shoes, hung my coat on the hook by the door, and sat down at the tiny kitchen table with the envelope in front of me. The overhead light buzzed softly. I stared at the thick packet for a long minute before I finally opened it. Inside were bank statements, loan documents, investment summaries, and a letter from their lawyer that basically said the same thing in fancy legal language. The family company was sinking fast. My dad had poured millions into a new development project that had collapsed when the city denied the final permits. Creditors were circling. The house on the hill, the one I had been told I would never see again, was already in pre-foreclosure. Even the cars were at risk. I read every page slowly, making notes in the margins with a red pen. The numbers were bad, really bad. But what hit me hardest wasn't the money. It was the little sticky note my mom had attached to the last page in her neat handwriting. Avery, we know we don't deserve your help,
But you always were the smartest one. Please. I set the papers down and rubbed my eyes. The smartest one. Funny how they only remembered that now. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the worn couch by the window. Outside, the streetlights glowed on the wet pavement. I thought about the last 4 years in flashes. The night I slept on a friend's couch because I couldn't afford rent yet. The first time a little boy hugged me after story time because I had read his favorite book with all the voices. The grant I wrote at 2 a.m. that brought in enough money to expand the children's section. The way my boss had promoted me to lead children's librarian after only 8 months because the programs I created kept growing. None of it had been easy, but none of it had required my family's approval either. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was Paige. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. "Avery?" Her voice was small. "Did you look at the papers?" "I did." She waited. When I didn't say anything else, she rushed on. "We're meeting with the bank tomorrow morning. Dad thinks if we can show them some kind of sponsorship or grant possibility from the library network, they might give us more time. Connor said you know people on the city council now. Is that true?" I stared at the rain sliding down the window. "I know a few people," I said carefully, "but I haven't decided if I'm going to ask them for anything." Paige exhaled shakily. "We're running out of time. The bank wants an answer by the end of the week or they start the foreclosure process. Mom hasn't slept in 3 days. Dad looks like he's aged 10 years. We're scared, Avery." I closed my eyes. The old Avery, the one who still desperately wanted her family's love, would have said yes immediately. She would have stayed up all night making calls and writing proposals just to hear them say they were proud of her. But that girl had walked out of the house 4 years ago with nothing but an acceptance letter. "I'll think about it tonight," I told her. "I'll let you know in the morning." She started to say something else, but I hung up before she could finish. I spent the next 2 hours at my laptop, cross-referencing the documents with public records I could access. The more I dug, the clearer it became. My dad hadn't just made one bad investment. There were multiple risky moves over the last 3 years, all hidden from my mom until it was too late. Some of the paperwork even suggested possible corners cut with permits that could lead to legal trouble if the bank decided to dig deeper. I closed the laptop and leaned back. Helping them would mean using every connection I had built on my own. It would mean stepping back into their world even for a little while. And it would mean they might start believing they could treat me like the old Avery again once the crisis passed. I wasn't sure I could risk that. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I made coffee, read the documents one more time, then drove to the library, even though it was my day off. The building was quiet and peaceful. I sat at my desk in the children's section, surrounded by colorful chairs and bright book covers. This was my world now. This was what I had chosen. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. Not for them, for me. I called the grant coordinator I had worked with on the last big library project. I called the city council member who attended my storytime events. I asked careful questions without giving away too many details. By noon, I had a clear picture of what might be possible and what it would cost me emotionally. My phone rang while I was eating a sandwich at my desk. It was Connor. "Hey," he said, sounding exhausted. "Paige told me you were looking into things. Any luck?" I took a slow breath. "I found a few possible paths," I said. "But before I do anything, I need to know one thing. Why now? Why, after 4 years of pretending I don't exist, did you all suddenly decide I was worth talking to again?" Connor was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "Because we're losing everything," he finally admitted. "And for the first time in our lives, we realized that the one person we threw away might be the only one who actually knows how to build something real." His words hung in the air between us. I looked around the children's section, the little drawings taped to the walls, the beanbag chairs where kids fell asleep during story time, the shelf of books I had personally chosen and fought for funding to buy. "I'll send you an email tonight with what I can do. But understand this, Connor. If I help you, it's because I choose to, not because you deserve it. And if any of you ever treat me the way you did 4 years ago again, I will walk away and never look back. Do you understand? I understand, he said softly. Thank you, Avery. I hung up and stared at the blank email screen for a long time. Writing that email felt like stepping onto a bridge I had burned behind me years ago. Every sentence I typed was careful, professional. I listed the contacts I could reach out to, the grant programs that might apply, the exact documents they would need to prepare. I didn't offer to do the work for them. I offered them the tools I had earned on my own. I hit send at 7:13 p.m. Then I closed my laptop, turned off the lights in the children's section, and walked home through the drizzle again. The apartment was quiet when I got back. I made dinner, ate it standing at the counter, and tried to feel proud of the life I had built. But something kept nagging at me, a small voice in the back of my mind that whispered, maybe this was the beginning of them trying to pull me back in. Maybe helping them now would only reopen every old wound. I was still thinking about it when my phone lit up with a new text. It was from my dad. A single sentence. Thank you for not turning your back on us the way we turned our back on you. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone down and stared at the wall. I had spent 4 years learning how to stand on my own. Now my family was asking me to use that strength to hold them up. The email I sent that night sat in my outbox like a loaded gun. I woke up the next morning to 3 missed calls from my dad, 2 from my mom, and 1 long voice message from Paige that I couldn't bring myself to listen to right away. I made coffee, fed the stray cat that sometimes waited on my fire escape, and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. The replies from the people I had reached out to had already started coming in. The grant coordinator I knew said she could fast-track a small emergency arts and education fund if the library agreed to partner on a joint community project. The city council member remembered the Storytime program and said she would speak to the bank's community relations officer. Another contact at a local foundation offered to review the documents if I vouched for the family. I forwarded everything to my parents with the short note. These are the doors I can open. You have to walk through them yourselves. I'm not doing the work for you. Then I closed the laptop and went to work like it was any other Thursday. The library was busy that morning. A group of kindergartners came in for story time, their little backpacks dragging on the floor. I read them The Library Lion with all the voices, the way I always did. When the session ended, one of the moms hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for making this place feel like magic for them." I smelled the real kind of smell that came easy here. By the time I got back to my desk, my phone was blowing up again. This time, it was a group text from the family. Dad, Avery, the bank just called. They're willing to extend the deadline if we can show proof of the grant application. Thank you. Mom, we don't know how to thank you enough. Connor, you saved us. Paige, can we come by the library after closing? We want to talk in person. I stared at the messages for a long time. I typed back 1 line. I'll be here until 6. Come at 6:15. Don't bring gifts or apologies. Just come. They showed up at exactly 6:17. I was locking the front doors when their cars pulled up. This time, they didn't stand outside like strangers. They came inside when I held the door open. The library was quiet except for the hum of the heating system and the soft tick of the big wall clock. We sat in the same meeting room as before, but the energy felt different, less desperate, more cautious. My dad spoke first. The bank is giving us 30 more days. Your contacts made that happen. We can't tell you how much this means. I nodded once. Connor leaned forward, elbows on the table. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about how we treated you. I was an asshole. I know that now. I was so focused on the family name and the business that I forgot you're my sister. Paige's eyes were already wet. I was jealous. You walked away and built something real. I stayed and did everything they wanted and still ended up feeling trapped. I took it out on you. My mom reached across the table like she wanted to touch my hand, but stopped herself halfway. We were wrong, Avery. Completely wrong. We thought success only looked one way. We had no idea you would turn out to be the strongest one of all. I listened to every word. I let them sit in the silence for a long moment. Then I said the thing I had practiced in my head all day. I'm going to help you finish this. I'll make the introductions, I'll review the grant paperwork, I'll even sit in on the bank meeting if you need me there. But there are rules. My rules. They all nodded quickly. First, you never again call my job lowly. Not in private, not in public, not even as a joke. This is my career. I love it. I'm proud of it. Second, you don't get to show up at my work or my apartment without calling first. I have a life here, a life you weren't part of for 4 years. Third, if this works and you save the company, you don't get to pretend the last 4 years didn't happen. We talk about it. We deal with it. Or I walk away for good. My dad's eyes were shiny. We agree. All of it. I looked at each of them one by one. Then we start tomorrow. I'll meet you at the bank at 10. Bring every document they asked for. They left quieter than they had come in. No big hugs, no dramatic tears, just quiet thank yous and the sound of the rain starting again outside. I locked up behind them and walked home slowly. The next 3 weeks became a strange kind of dance. I kept my regular library hours. I ran story time, I helped kids find books, and in the evenings and early mornings I worked on my family's crisis like it was another grant proposal. I sat in meetings with bankers who remembered me from childhood fundraisers. I wrote emails that made my mother cry when she read the drafts. I watched my dad sit across conference tables looking smaller than I had ever seen him. Connor started showing up at the library on his lunch break sometimes. He didn't ask for anything. He just sat in the children's section and watched me work. One day, he picked up a book I had recommended and read it cover to cover while he waited for me to finish. Paige sent me flowers to the library with a card that simply said, "Thank you for still being you." My mom started texting me pictures of the garden she was trying to keep alive at the house, the same garden I used to help her tend when I was little. It felt careful, like everyone was walking on eggshells, afraid one wrong move would send me running again. But it also felt like something was healing. Until the night, everything almost fell apart again. It was a Tuesday. I had just finished a late storytime session for the elementary kids. The library was empty except for me and the night security guard. I was turning off the lights in the children's section when my phone rang. It was my dad. His voice was shaking so badly, I could barely understand him at first. "Avery, the bank just called. They found something in the old investment files. Something about the permits we used on the last project. They're saying it could be fraud. They're threatening to call the authorities if we don't come clean by tomorrow morning." I froze with my hand on the light switch. My dad kept talking, faster now. "We need you at the emergency meeting first thing tomorrow. The bank president said he remembers you from when you were a kid. He said if you're there, he might be willing to listen before he calls the investigators." I closed my eyes. 4 years ago, they had told me I was dead to them. Now they needed me to stand in a room and vouch for them so they wouldn't lose everything. And this time the stakes weren't just money. This time it could mean legal consequences. I stood there in the dark children's section, surrounded by books I had fought to bring into this library. And I realized the choice in front of me was bigger than I had thought. Helping them now might save their company, but it might also cost me the peace I had spent 4 years building. and I still didn't know if I was willing to pay that price. I stood there in the dark children's section long after the security guard had finished his rounds and left for the night. The only light came from the emergency exit sign above the picture bookshelves, casting a soft red glow across the colorful spines. My phone was still warm in my hand from my dad's call. The words kept echoing. Fraud. Authorities. Tomorrow morning. I locked the front doors behind me and walked home through the quiet streets. The rain had stopped, but the sidewalks were slick and shining under the streetlights. Every step felt heavier than the last. By the time I reached my apartment, my mind was spinning so fast, I couldn't even think about sleep. I made tea I didn't drink and sat on the couch staring at the wall. The envelope with all the bank documents was still on the kitchen table where I had left it. I thought about calling my boss and taking the day off, but I knew I wouldn't. The library was my safe place. It was the one thing my family had never touched. At 3:17 a.m., I finally opened my laptop and started drafting an email to the bank president. I kept it professional, factual, and short. I reminded him who I was, how I had grown up in Eugene, and how I had built the children's literacy program from nothing. I offered to attend the meeting as a character reference for my family's intentions, but I made it crystal clear that I was not guaranteeing anything, and that I was not part of the business. I hit send at 4:02 a.m. and finally crawled into bed. I woke up at 7:30 with a knot in my stomach the size of a fist. I dressed carefully, my favorite soft gray cardigan, dark jeans, and the library name tag I always wore like armor. When I got to the bank at 9:45, my family was already waiting in the lobby. They looked like they hadn't slept either. My dad's tie was crooked. My mom's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Connor and Paige sat side by side on the leather couch like they were waiting for a verdict in court.
The bank president, Mr. Harlan, greeted me with a warm handshake. He remembered me from the library fundraisers and the time I had brought a group of kids to tour the bank vaults for a history project. That small connection felt like the only thing keeping this meeting from turning into a disaster. We sat around the long conference table. The mood was tense. Mr. Harlan laid out the problem clearly. The permits on the last development project had been filed with incorrect environmental impact data. It looked intentional. The bank had already notified the state regulatory board. If they found evidence of fraud, the entire loan portfolio could be called due immediately, and criminal charges could follow. My dad started to speak, but Mr. Harlan held up his hand. "I want to hear from Avery first," he said. "She's the only one in this room who has built something from the ground up without family money. I want to know what she thinks we should do." Every eye turned to me. I took a slow breath and spoke the truth I had been turning over all night. "I'm not here to defend what happened with the permits," I said. "That's between you and them. But I can tell you this. My family made a mistake 4 years ago when they disowned me for choosing my own path. They're learning now that success doesn't always look the way they thought it would. If you give them 30 more days and a chance to fix the filing errors honestly, I believe they will, because they finally understand what it feels like to lose everything." My voice stayed steady, even though my hands were shaking under the table. Mr. Harlan studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded once. 30 days, he said, but the corrected documents must be filed by Monday, and I want weekly updates. And Avery, if this goes south, I'm going to need you to testify that you warned them. I agreed. The meeting ended faster than I expected. When we stepped back into the lobby, my family surrounded me like I had just saved their lives. My mom hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. Connor clapped me on the back and said thank you like the word hurt to say. Paige was crying again. My dad pulled me aside near the elevators. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "After everything we put you through, you still showed up." I looked him in the eye. "I showed up for the person I am now, not for the girl you tried to erase. Remember that."
He nodded, eyes wet. We walked out of the bank together into the bright Oregon morning. For the first time in 4 years, we stood on the sidewalk as a family. People passing by probably thought we looked normal, just parents and their grown kids catching up after a meeting. They had no idea how close we had come to losing everything, including each other. The next 10 days became a whirlwind. I split my time between the library and helping my family fix the paperwork. I still ran story time every morning. I still read to the kids who waited for me with their favorite books clutched in their hands. But in the afternoons, I sat in my dad's office going over files, catching mistakes, and rewriting sections so they would pass regulatory review. Connor started showing up early every day with coffee for everyone. He listened more than he talked. Paige brought lunch and actually asked me questions about my job instead of making jokes about it. My mom kept the office fridge stocked with the kind of snacks I used to love as a kid. It felt strange, almost normal, but I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on a Friday afternoon. I was in my dad's office alone, double-checking the final environmental report, when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. "Ms. Langford, this is Investigator Ramirez with the State Regulatory Board. We received the corrected permit filings this morning. We also received an anonymous tip that the original errors were deliberate. We'd like you to come in next week to answer some questions about your family's business practices." My stomach dropped. I hung up and stared at the report in front of me. The numbers looked clean now, but someone had tipped them off anyway. I called my dad immediately. When he answered, I could hear the hope in his voice. "Avery, is everything okay with the final filing?" I told him about the call. The silence on his end lasted so long, I thought the line had gone dead. Then he said the words I never expected. "I think I know who made the tip." My heart started racing. "Who?" He exhaled slowly. "Your brother, Connor. He came to me last night and said he couldn't live with the lies anymore. He said if we were going to fix this, we had to do it the right way, even if it meant facing the consequences." I sat down hard in the office chair. Connor had been the one pushing the hardest for me to help. He had been the one apologizing the loudest. And now he might have just handed the regulators the rope to hang the whole family. I looked at the closed office door and realized the real test wasn't whether I could save them. The real test was whether they could save themselves, even from each other. And right now, with an investigation opening and my brother possibly turning on the family to make things right, I wasn't sure any of us were ready for what was coming next. The phone was still in my hand when my dad's voice cracked on the other end. "Connor did it," he said again, like saying it twice would make it less real. "He called the regulatory board last night. He told them everything about the original permit errors. He said he couldn't keep lying anymore, not after you stepped in to help us." I sat down slowly in the empty office chair, the final corrected report still open on the desk in front of me. The words blurred. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Connor. The same brother who had laughed in my face 4 years ago when I said I wanted to be a librarian? The same brother who had called me a disappointment in front of the whole family? He had just lit the match that could burn everything down. "Why?" I whispered. Dad sounded exhausted. He said watching you show up for us after everything we did to you made him realize he didn't want to live the rest of his life carrying secrets. He said if we were going to fix this, we had to fix it the right way. I closed my eye.
The meeting with the investigator was set for the next morning at 9. Mr. Harlan from the bank would be there too. My family asked me to come. They didn't beg this time. They just asked. I said yes. The next morning, the conference room at the state building felt smaller than it should have. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Investigator Ramirez sat at the head of the table with a thick folder in front of her. Mr. Harlan sat beside her. My family sat on one side. I sat on the other, like a witness. Ramirez didn't waste time. She laid out the evidence: the original false environmental data, the rushed filings, the money that had moved in circles that didn't add up. Then she looked straight at me. "Ms. Langford, you've been helping your family with the corrected documents. You have a reputation in this community for honesty and building things from nothing. I want to hear from you first." Every eye turned to me. I spoke carefully, choosing every word. "I didn't know about the original mistakes until yesterday. I'm not here to defend what happened 4 years ago, but I can tell you what I've seen in the last few weeks. My family made bad choices. They're trying to fix them now. They're being honest with each other for the first time in a long time. If you give them the chance to make this right without destroying the company, I believe they will." Ramirez studied me for a long moment. Then she turned to my dad. "Mr. Langford, your son Connor contacted us yesterday. He provided additional information. He said he wanted full transparency." Connor didn't flinch. He looked at me across the table and gave the smallest nod. My dad's voice was rough when he answered. "We accept full responsibility. We'll pay whatever fines are required. We'll correct every filing. We just ask for the opportunity to keep the business running so we can make this right for our employees and our family." The room stayed quiet while Ramirez flipped through her folder. Finally, she closed it. 30 days to submit every corrected document and pay the initial fine. After that, we'll decide on further penalties. No criminal charges if everything checks out. But one more mistake, and we won't be this lenient again. The meeting ended just like that. Outside on the sidewalk, my family stood in a small circle under the gray Oregon sky. No one spoke for a long time. Then Connor stepped forward and looked at me. "I'm sorry," he said. "For everything. For 4 years ago. For using you. For almost letting this destroy us. I was scared, and I was proud, and I was wrong." Paige wiped her eyes. We all were. My mom reached out and touched my arm, gentle, like she was afraid I might pull away. "You didn't have to stand up for us in there," she said, "but you did. Thank you." My dad didn't say anything. He just pulled me into a hug that felt different from any hug I had ever gotten from him. It wasn't the hug of a man who controlled everything. It was the hug of a man who was finally learning how to let go. I let him hold me for a few seconds, then stepped back. "I'm not coming back to the company," I said quietly. "I'm not moving home. I'm not giving up the library. This doesn't mean everything's fixed. It just means I'm willing to see if we can build something new." They all nodded. No arguments. No pressure. The weeks that followed were slow and careful. I kept my mornings at the library. I read to the kids. I planned new programs. I came home to my quiet apartment filled with books and plants and peace. In the afternoons and evenings, I helped my family when they asked, reviewing documents, sitting in on calls, offering advice when they needed it. But I never stayed late. I never let them pull me back into the old patterns. Connor started volunteering at the library on Saturdays. He shelved books and listened to the kids read out loud. Paige brought her law school notes and helped me understand some of the legal language in the bank papers. My mom started coming to story time once a week just to sit in the back and watch me work. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward silences. There were still moments when old hurts rose up and made the room feel too small. But we kept showing up. One Saturday in late December, the library held its annual holiday storytime event. The children's section was packed. Twinkling lights hung from the ceiling. Kids sat cross-legged on the colorful rug while I read the Polar Express with all the voices. When I looked up at the end of the story, my entire family was sitting in the back row. My dad had his arm around my mom. Connor was holding a little boy on his lap. Paige was taking pictures with her phone, smiling the way she used to when we were kids. After the last child left, my family stayed behind. My dad cleared his throat. "The bank approved the final restructuring today," he said. "We're going to be okay, because of you." I shook my head. Because of all of us. Including Connor, for telling the truth when it mattered most. Connor looked at me, eyes shining. "I don't deserve a sister like you," he said, "but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to." I smiled, small and real. That's enough for me. We walked out of the library together into the cold December evening. Snow had started to fall, soft and quiet, covering the streets of Eugene in a fresh white blanket. For the first time in 4 years, I didn't feel like I was walking away from my family. I felt like I was walking beside them, on my own terms. If you have ever been thrown away by your own family for choosing the life you actually wanted, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. You know, looking back at everything that happened, I've come to understand one simple truth. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who teach you how strong you can become without them. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they learn to become people worth keeping in your life again. Not because they demand it, but because you choose to let them in, slowly, carefully, on your own terms. I chose that, and I've never regretted it for a single day.